Hello everybody, this is Mr. McCaver here, and today I'm going to begin our first of our what'll be semi-regularly weekend video series videos, and today we're going to talk about the church and the Renaissance. So where we begin this conversation, we really kind of had to set the precedent of what's going on in the other parts of Europe during the Renaissance. We've largely focused on what's happening in the Italian Renaissance, and we need to fast forward a little bit what's going on in the Northern Renaissance. So in the North, we're really seeing a small divergence away from what's going on. The Northern art movement is a bit different than what you see in the Italian city-states. And it's largely focused around the works of two different artists, my apologies. Rembrandt van Rijn and Albert Dürer. Dürer is going to be the first of these two artists to really make an impact on the scene. He is what some people will call the Da Vinci of the North because of his ability to master a variety of mediums, whether it's sketching, whether it's artwork via bronze work, whether it's paintings. He's about as talented as anyone who's in the Italian Renaissance to the south, but takes a slightly different spin on what he creates. Whereas a lot of the commissioned works in Italy are being commissioned for the Catholic Church, Dürer is working largely for independently wealthy lords farther in the north in the Holy Roman Empire. And a lot of his work will reflect a more natural desire to replicate what he sees in the world. So a lot of his art will be sketchings of animals or nature kind of designs that he sees. While he does do a little bit in regards to portraits, there's not a lot of them that really stand out. The most iconic which, though, is his self-portrait of himself, where he really depicts himself in a Christ-like image. Something that causes a lot of controversy throughout Europe in his willingness to do that. The other artist that really stands out during this period is a guy by the name of Rembrandt van Rijn. He's actually really late on the Renaissance scene, actually being a part of things in the 16th and really, I guess, early 17th century. And while Dürer takes kind of the nature approach to depicting a lot of his stuff, Rembrandt almost exclusively works with people. He paints people in their day-to-day lives to extraordinary detail. And what you see with Rembrandt is, again, a focus on what people actually are experiencing and not what the idealized imagery that you get in some of the other people out there, some of the other artists of the period. Potentially like Botticelli, who creates these deity-type images like Venus and other Roman gods. And we also see this change in approach to people who aren't artists. The guy by the name of Desiderius Erasmus is going to play a major role in European affairs as a whole, because he's looking at the ideas of what are going on in the Renaissance, this ability to question things, this humanism, but applying it more to the Christian mentality and the Christian condition. So we have to start this conversation by really reinforcing the fact that Erasmus' beliefs come from the guy who, to the day he died, he was a devout Catholic in Europe. But he was very focused on the notion that your faith should not be a blind faith. It should be an educated faith. It should be through study of the scripture, of the church teachings, and you develop your opinions from those. Not just because someone tells you things, but because that's what you truly believe. So he believes as part of this, we need to have a Bible in a language that people can understand. So he advocates for the use of the vernacular, the common language to whatever region you are in. This will allow people to become a more educated Christian in their beliefs. They can read the Bible, they can understand the words of God, of Christ, or whoever, the apostles, and then interpret them for their own meaning. And part of that is what he believed is some of the problems in the church is the church was just not transparent in what it did. I created a situation where exclusive power was in the hands of the priests or in bishops or cardinals, and sometimes they weren't deserving of it. Either there were abuses by them that warranted removal that never took place, or reality is that they were focusing on political issues and not heavenly issues. So he was making an attempt to try to help the church correct what he saw as flaws in its nature. He is going to play an important role in the eventual Protestant Reformation, even though he never intended to create any sort of change to the faith that would fracture it, like Martin Luther will eventually do. His willingness to question things is going to be the foundation by which eventually we see the Protestant reformers launch off. So one of the common phrases used to describe them is the seeds Erasmus' ideas are the seeds that become the Protestant Reformation later on. But again, it wasn't out of desire to start a new faith. He was a devout Catholic till the day he died. But unfortunately, the reality is that there's a lot of problems in the Catholic Church during the time of the Renaissance that eventually will take shape and be forced to be reformed in the Protestant Reformation. This begins because during the Middle Ages, the Church had unparalleled control over everything, and people started doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. Priests started having roles as political leaders in their towns and in their cities. Cardinals become significant political leaders in entire nations. And because of that, things got off track. And the church could control everything that was going on. So if there was ever an idea or heresy that came out, they had the ability to stop it. And sometimes it was to the detriment of the church itself. It didn't allow itself to reform and evolve like it probably should have during that 600-700 year period. Well, the Renaissance is going to change that as we start to see the growing power of nation states and the weakness of the papacy in Rome. New ideas are going to come out that are going to change things, and because people are willing to look at the past now, because humanism is directing human behavior. Some of the first voices in this notion are people like John Wycliffe. He is an English theologian from Oxford, and he had an issue with the fact that there are religious orders who have vows of poverty who have significant amounts of religious wealth. Why should this happen? Why are religious orders that are supposed to be there to help the poor acquiring mass chunks of land, have things adorned in gold, jewelry, diamonds? This seemed to be contradictory to what their mission was supposed to be. And he also believed that the Pope was using his religious authority to gain political authority and wealth and power and prestige. And the Bible doesn't say that you should be able to do that. The earliest popes, whether it was Peter or the other leaders of the faith, they didn't acquire personal wealth or gain. They did what they did to spread the message of God. And popes were now no longer doing that. And he believed one of the true solutions to this was developing a vernacular Bible. A Bible that could be read by the people so that they would be aware what their faith is supposed to believe, and that the church was overstretching its bounds. Well, these ideas are clearly not going to be adopted by the vast majority of the church. They're not going to be happy about it. But other people will continue to build upon this. A guy by the name of John Huss will also look into the powers of the papacy and of the church in Central Europe, not just in England, but the rest of the continent. And it becomes such an issue that the church has to call a council. The Council of Constance. And the question is, has the church overstepped its boundaries? Has priests started doing things that they are no longer supposed to be doing? And they called John Huss to speak about this. And at the Council of Constance, he comes, and the church's response is, no. You don't get to speak out against what the church does. They silence Huss. He is removed from the situation. And instead of reforming abuses that exist, they just kind of buried them. There are two things that come out of this period, though, out of the Council of Constance. One is the idea sacrosancta. It is that the church exclusively has the right to address other issues. Other people outside of the church body, the church hierarchy, should not be trying to comment or reform church issues, but that the church will start to do this itself. And this was important. The Pope now has the ability to start to mandate reform and change. Whether or not they do, it's a different story. Also, we see the practice of frequents, which are regular council meetings with the elite of the church to make sure whatever form is enacted by the papacy actually starts taking place. So this is supposed to be tying these regional cardinals in places like France and England, Holy Roman Empire, back to Rome. They have to meet regularly with the Pope to make sure that they are actually carrying out whatever the Pope decrees. These are supposed to be good things that are really trying to push the church into a more spiritual fashion like it's supposed to be. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen. The Pope then decides that, there shouldn't be any voices that speak out against me. And a new papal decree called Execrabilis, I can't say that word appropriately, I apologize, that really calls anything about the papacy that might be wrong is actually heresy. So if the Pope does something wrong, anyone who speaks about it is actually now a heretic. And a heretic by law is someone who is punished typically by death. So this is trying to completely wipe out any sort of accountability by the papacy. And this is largely due to the people in charge of the papacy at the time. It's a family called the Borgias. The Borgias are this extraordinarily powerful family, rivaling the Medici in Italy in influence, and they will start to just dominate the papacy. And they are extraordinarily corrupt in what they do. There will be a series of Borgia popes, which in your mind should immediately cause red flags, because popes shouldn't be having immediate family that could then eventually become pope themselves. But the Borgias will marry. They will have children. Many of them will have numerous children by numerous women. And then they give those sons that they have various church positions, developing an era of nepotism in the church unlike anything ever seen before. Cardinals across Europe are directly the children of popes, and that's never supposed to happen. In fact, one of the reasons why we know Machiavelli's The Prince is supposed to be sarcastic, it's supposed to be an attempt to point out the insanity of the situation, is that his example for what is a good leader is a Borgia pope, a Borgia leader. Europe is aware that the Borgias are corrupt, but they don't really have anything to step in to try to stop them. And this is a problem because Calixtus III, Alexander VI, all of these people they're not great influences on the Catholic Church. They are pushing the church down a path that it can't survive. So, that is what is setting us up through the Renaissance and how the church plays a role in it. Unfortunately, during the Renaissance, while a lot of great things are happening in the Italian city-states and even the artistic movements that are taking place in the Northern Renaissance, corruption in Rome is going to really set the church up for a real rough period coming up. The Borgia popes and the influence that they have is really setting the stage for what will become the Protestant Reformation. And because for hundreds of years there was no one who ever spoke out against the papacy, they aren't prepared for it. Because people like Erasmus will open the door, whether it's Huss, whether it's Wycliffe, well, it's eventually Martin Luther, Ulrich Zwingli, or John Calvin. Change is going to happen. And unfortunately, because they ignored the words of Erasmus or Wycliffe, the church is going to be reacting to this in a really unprepared fashion. All right, thanks, guys. You guys have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you guys next week.